So to make the lighting rig then, I've got the main components here in front of me. I've actually purchased 2 rolls of this strip LED, and each reel is 5 meters long. There's lots of sellers selling this on eBay. It's quite common now, and it's really cheap, and it does make effectively good lighting, much better than say fluorescent tubing, which is what I actually used to use. Now, to actually house all this, what I've got here are some cheap component boxes. This one here, I've got 2 of these, and I actually picked these up from the pound shop, really cheap. And this one, I've actually had it a while, but you can find these on eBay for around £2.99, again pretty cheap. And I've got various brackets and little angle connectors here that we're going to actually use to attach these housings to the actual beam on our lighting rig at the end. So I've got the largest of the component boxes here in front of me. That's going to be the main lighting rig, and the 2 smaller ones are going to actually come in from the sides just to add extra lighting, just to get rid of any shadowing. But we've got to remove all these compartments here inside the project box itself, and I'm also going to trim away the lip on here as well. Now, you can actually cut this ABS plastic away with side cutters, but although it's quite flexible, when you actually start cutting it, it's also quite brittle, and you can actually tear the actual spacers away from the base of the box itself. So I find it a lot better if you get your Dremel tool and actually score a line around the sides of these little separators themselves, and once you've got a line scored in there, you can get your side cutters and just snip away, and that way you just actually cut away the plastic you don't want, and you won't end up tearing holes in the box itself. So I've got the Dremel tool, and I've scored the sides in the compartments of the first 2 rows of this box here. So what I'm going to do now is just stop for a moment and actually cut away these first 2 rows. I like to stop after I've done say 2, because it does get a little bit boring just scoring away here, and of course when you actually cut away the first 2 rows, it gives you a little bit more room to get in there with the Dremel tool to get the scoring as close to the base as you can. So I've got the majority of the plastic from those compartments cut away now, and it's level enough for me to actually put the strips of LEDs in there, and when it's finished you're not going to see all this rough plastic anyway. So what I'm actually going to do now is get my Dremel tool and cut this lip off that's all the way around this plastic box here, just to tidy it up a little bit and to lower its profile slightly. So what I've done for the main housing for the lighting rig, I've attached these metal brackets to the sides here. So here's a closer look. I've reinforced the corner with these right angle brackets there, and I've got 2 of the straight ones, and I've attached both of those with a wing nut and a washer here, so I can actually tighten those up and change the angle along this length here. And at the side I attached the side here with 2 small nuts and bolts, mainly because I couldn't get the rivet gun through that distance there. I didn't have long enough rivets, but I have riveted it on the this side here. So I'm going to attach all this to the actual lighting boom, and then we'll be able to adjust these 2 wing nuts and adjust the actual angle of the light. And to attach it to the boom itself, I'm just going to use a couple of these little right angle brackets here, and I'm going to rivet them directly to the boom itself, and then I can use a rivet or a small nut and bolt to actually attach the main lighting housing here. Now, the thinking behind this is you don't actually want the lighting actually looking straight down on the object you're working on in your bench, because you'll get far too much reflection. So you want it to actually come out a little bit and then actually angle down, and then it's not directly on top of the object that you're filming, and it will cut down a lot on the reflection, hopefully. And then at the 2 sides at either ends here, I can actually add the smaller ones, and they can be tilted down and angled just to get rid of any shadowing. So what I'm going to do next with the housing then is use some spray adhesive on the inside here, and I'm going to line all this with some aluminium cooking foil. So these particular strips of LEDs that I've got off eBay have this protective silicone cover over the top of them, so it does protect the LEDs and the resistors, and probably adds a little bit of waterproofing as well. But just to make this easier for me, I'm going to actually remove all this to get it out of the way, because I don't actually need it for this application. So you can just cut it where it's marked. You can actually indicate where you actually need to cut to leave the two solder pads in place there, and you can just get in and peel it off, and you can actually peel it off in quite big lengths. So here are all the LED strips cut to length, and I've already gone ahead and wired them all up back in parallel just like they are on the reel itself. It's a little bit time consuming cutting these little short jumper wires and soldering them on, but it's much easier to actually solder them in place on the flat bench like this is, rather than trying to do it inside the housing as well. It's just a little bit too fiddly. So what I'm going to do now is take some electrician's tape and just sandwich the ends in between two pieces of this tape, just to protect the wiring itself, because the little solder points on these are actually quite fragile. You don't want to be moving them around too much, and also because I've got the aluminium foil in the housing, I don't want any danger of actually shorting out to that. So a little bit of electrician's tape sandwiched on the ends should do the trick. So all the LEDs are in place, and I also know from experience that the double-sided tape that's on the back of these strips isn't the best, and the LEDs themselves do give off a small amount of heat. They don't get excessively hot, but after a while the double-sided tape does come away. So what I've done is run down a few strips of clear tape there, just to add a little bit of an extra strength, just to hold them in place. Now I've also soldered on a length of wire that I'm going to use to actually power the LEDs themselves. So I've just drilled a small hole in the corner of the enclosure here, and I've soldered that onto those 2 points there. And remember, because these are all in parallel, you don't actually need to add power at the ends. You can actually add it anywhere in the strips here, so I could actually solder it on there if I wanted to. And indeed, if we take a look at the smaller ones here, I've got a power wire coming into the center of the enclosure and soldered on there, and I've also added one of these little right angle clips to the middle of each of these two satellite lights, if you like to call them filler lights, just so we can actually connect this to the actual boom itself. Now, something else that we need to do to this is actually add some kind of material to diffuse the light, because if we used it as it is, the individual LEDs would be too bright and wouldn't look good on film. You want something to actually diffuse it all as one light source, if you like. Now, you can purchase diffuser paper off eBay, but it is rather expensive. And when you're not too worried about the amount of heat that your light source generates, you can actually get away with using tracing paper, which is much cheaper. I purchased quite a large pad of this A3 tracing paper from a local shop, and it only cost £2.99 for a pad full of this, where diffuser paper is actually a lot more expensive. Now, what I do to attach this in place is use some epoxy and just put a small amount on the edge of the enclosure itself, and then turn the enclosure upside down on top of the tracing paper and let its own weight make contact with the tracing paper, and after it's set, then it just holds it in place. When I first did this, I tried to use super glue, but there's something in the fumes of the super glue that actually affects the lenses on the little LEDs here, and it does actually change the colour of the LEDs. That's why I'm going to use epoxy. So once the epoxy is set around the edges there, just flip it over on a flat surface and get a sharp knife and just score down the side to cut away any excess. So I've attached one of the smaller lights here to the actual lighting boom itself, and I just want to show you exactly what I've done here. So I've got 4 of these little right angled brackets that I have here in my hand, and I've riveted them together in this fashion. I've got the 2 here, and then in between those 2 I've put a third one and riveted all those 3 together, and the 4th one I've actually riveted on top of the 3rd one here. And what I've actually done is riveted it here on the main boom itself, and then the small little filler light has one of these little right angle bends on already, and I've attached that with a nut and bolt to the rest of the actual right angle bends here. And what that's allowing me to do is it gives me a full range of motion just by using these little right angle bends. So that's how I've actually attached the smaller lights to this lighting boom. So I've wired all the lights up along the lighting boom here, and I've actually run them at the back of the boom itself and just cable tied them on. But I did have a afterthought afterwards. You could actually drill holes into the boom and have the wires running inside the boom itself. It would just make it a lot neater. So what I've done, I've wired the 2 side filler lights together, and separately I've wired the main light on its own. And what I've actually done here to tidy it up a little bit, where I soldered them all together, I've just got some heat shrink tubing, soldered the wires together, and then over the top of that I got a pen body here and cut it down slightly so it's this length here, and I slipped that over the top, and some heat shrink tubing over the top of that. It's just a nice little trick to actually tidy your wiring up over something like this. It just makes a much neater job of it. So I've put this little project box here at the bottom with a couple of rocker switches there, so I can select each light independently, so I can have the main light on or just the 2 side light ones. And I've done that because when I'm actually working and not filming, I prefer to just have the 2 side light ones on, because when you've got them all on, it's just a little bit too bright to work under. It's fine for filming, but a little bit too bright to work under for extended periods of time. And at the bottom of the project box here, I've just put a little power jack plug in there, so I can plug in the power supply to actually run these lights. And a little thing about these lights, I've got lots and lots of old power supplies and wall warts that I've saved over time, and some of them, normally the cheaper ones from China, actually make the LEDs flicker. And apparently, from a little bit of reading that I've done, that's to do with the frequency that the power supply actually works at. So some of them do make the LEDs flicker. So if you build something like this and you get a little bit of flickering with your power supply, I'd look at that first before you actually start looking at your LEDs. And of course on eBay you can get a proper dedicated power supply designed to actually power LEDs, and apparently from what I've read, if you actually use one of those, you do get a longer lifespan out of your LEDs. So I've got a couple of those on order. So now I can actually select the lights independently. The 2 side lights are on now, and if I'm filming I put the main one on as well. So here's the finished rig then, with all the lights actually switched on, and I'm rather pleased how this actually came out. It does look a much cleaner design and a lot more professional than the first one that I built. If you take a look at the first one, I did learn a lot of mistakes building the first one that I've corrected in the second one, but although in saying that, the first one still performs just adequately. It just doesn't look as clean a build as the second one does. And of course you can move the lighting rig independently of the camera arm there, and the actual boom itself is just sat on top of the pole there, and so it doesn't actually fall down. I've got another little clip there that I've got off another clothes rail, and of course if you didn't want to go to the effort of buying a second clothes rail just so you had another one of these clips, you can pick up a Jubilee clip off eBay. It just has a little tightening screw on, so you can actually tighten it with your finger and thumb there, and that'll also do the same job as that. And this is the entire rig actually turned around at a right angle to the other bench, so I can actually bring in my mobile bench here and actually work on that as well. And that's the one of the main objectives of me actually building this, is because I wanted to actually film at that side bench and on this mobile bench here, so I can actually film a bigger build, if you will, which I've got a few of those coming up hopefully this year. Now, I'm not sure about the main filler light when it's actually turned around like this. I think that that might reflect a little bit too much depending on what I'm filming on this bench, so I may have to look at that if I want to actually film with this bigger bench. But I can always turn that off and just have the two little filler lights at the side here, and I have got a small mobile rig that I can bring in and actually use that to light up the area. But apart from that, I'm really pleased how this has actually turned out, so I should be able to film quite easily at either the side bench or on this mobile bench. So I hope you found this useful, and you can take some of the things that I've shown in this video to actually build your own video and lighting rig, because when I've actually done some searches on the internet, as I've said previously, there isn't really a lot for actually filming on the bench itself. They all seem to be, you know, for bloggers who sit in front of the camera. So yeah, this is what I've actually come up with over the last 3 years. This is what it's actually evolved into. So I mean, you can take some of the ideas and actually build it a little bit differently depending on what materials you can actually get your hands on. And as I say, the whole thing has cost me probably 50, maybe 60 pounds. So you know, it's a pretty cheap build, and it is quite a professional looking rig when it's actually finished, especially the second one, because as I said, I did learn a lot of mistakes from building the first one. And as far as the lab goes, this is probably the cleanest it's been in the last 6 months. It's normally a lot messier than this, but I have tidied up a little bit so I can actually shoot this video. So any questions or comments about the rig, then please drop a comment below and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you did find it useful, please give it a thumbs up here on YouTube, because it does help, and hopefully you'll join me on the next one.